Welcome to the Women at the Top author interview series. My name is Regina Barr, and I am the founder of the Women at the Top Network, and I will be your host today. For those of you who don't know us, Women at the Top is a community of like-minded women, and it's a community of women who share the WAT mission and vision. And simply put, our goal is to empower aspiring women to lead. And we do that by providing training, connections, and various types of communications. Joining me today is Diane Windingland, author of 100 Tips and Tricks to Appear Confident in Presentations, Public Speaking Success in 5 minutes or less. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Diane. And I have had the privilege of knowing Diane for some time and also having interviewed her in the past. So it's really a pleasure to have you again here today, Diane. Diane Windingland is owner of Virtual Speech Coach and the author of several communication skills books. She was originally trained as an engineer, but since 2011, she has been speaking for organizations that want to help their people have better, more profitable conversations and presentations. She also coaches subject matter experts on how to present with clarity and confidence, shaping what they know into presentations that not only engage, but get results. Diane lives with her husband in Shoreview, Minnesota, and dedicates much of her volunteer time to Toastmasters International, an organization that not only empowers people to be better leaders, but also better communicators. With that, I want to say welcome to our program today.
Thank you, Regina. It is such a pleasure to be here today. Being here virtually is almost as much fun as being there in person.
Well, I am really delighted to have you here today. And actually, I think I had mentioned to you that this is my first time doing an author interview via Zoom. So groundbreaking for me and Women at the Top. So there you have it. We're going to do this together today. And for those of you listening in, and also for you, Diane, I do have my assistant, Chris Goswiller, joining us today, kind of running the show behind the scenes, just to help make sure that, at least for the first few times out doing this, that I don't forget to hit record, or that something goes sideways and I need some help with that. So thank you to Chris for being with us as well. So with that, Diane, I am going to jump right in. And I always like to tell people, I just gave you the backstory on Zoom today, my first time out, and I always like to hear the backstory on the book. So tell us, why was it important for you to write a book on the topic of presentations at this particular time?
Well, thank you, Regina. I've written about 10 books on communication skills, and this is the first book that was actually inspired by another book. Back in November, as part of a Toastmasters book club, I read the book, I'll put it up here on the screen, 100 Tricks to Appear Smart in Meetings. Now, this is a very tongue-in-cheek book with some perhaps useful tips, but other things that will just make you smile. And it had pictures, it was fun to read, and it got me thinking, so what if I did a book somewhat like this, but on presentation skills? And frankly, maybe not make it quite so snarky, but actually something helpful. And that's how, as you can see, very similar cover, I came up with the concept for the book. And yes, you have your copy. And one of the biggest things that I hear from people that they want, that they don't have when it comes to public speaking, is confidence. And I believe that you can work at confidence from two different directions. You can work on the internal aspects so that you feel confident, and you can also work on the externals of appearing confident. So if you can see it, if you can imagine being confident, and if you can achieve it by acting confident, they will compound on each other. As you act more confident, you will start to feel more confident. As you feel more confident, you'll start to act more confident. So that is the biggest thing that people seem to want when it comes to public speaking, is confidence.
Yes, because I think you and I have both heard the study that basically says that people would rather die than speak in public, which makes me very sad, actually. So public speaking clearly is very difficult for a lot of people. Why is it that you think that so many people lack the confidence or that they fear public speaking?
Well, let me turn that question a little bit around on you, Regina. Now, you are an accomplished public speaker, professional speaker. Do you ever have fear or anxiety?
Yes, I do. And actually, I was a little worried today when I first got on. My video didn't work.
So, why is that? If you were to analyze your own feelings of anxiety or possibly even fear, what is the cause of that, do you think?
I think for me, I want to come off as polished and professional. And if something like the technology is not working, I don't come off as polished and professional. And then secondarily, I want to make sure that people have a good experience.
Correct. So, looking at that first reason of you wanting to come off polished and professional, what is the deeper fear behind that, do you think? That if you don't, what's wrong? What causes that deeper fear?
I think we all want to be liked and respected by other people. And I think the deeper fear is if we screw up, we won't.
That's right. The deepest fear, and I think the root fear underneath the fear of public speaking, is the fear of being judged, that people will judge us. I'll give you an example. Many, many years ago, I was in a Toastmaster speech competition, a 5 to 7 minute speech, and I had it down pat. I was in the middle of giving the speech in the competition. There were more than 100 people in the audience, and I was killing it until I wasn't, when I completely blanked out and I forgot what I was going to say. I stood there maybe for 8 to 10 seconds, which maybe doesn't sound that bad, but if you're standing there with nothing to say and wondering what you're going to say, it feels like an eternity.
Yes,
And
it does.
I finally got back to my speech, finished it. Needless to say, I did not place. However, I believe that every failure can be a learning opportunity. And in this case, I learned two important things. The first was that it was a really bad idea to try to memorize a speech word for word, because I had created a rut for my mind. And I had one way to go from the beginning to the end. And if something happened, like nerves in the moment in front of a big audience, that threw me off the path, I had no alternate paths to go on. So I learned that it's better not to memorize, but instead to internalize content. And even the bigger lesson was that I realized I was being selfish. I was so concerned about what other people would think about me, about how I was being judged, that I realized I was really just focusing on me, and I needed to focus on others.
Well, I think that's, a great way. I was surprised you used the word selfish, but that makes sense to me, right? Because the focus is on us. When we focus outwardly, the whole dynamic changes. And I think it also is freeing for your mind if you're trying to provide information to people. So I like that, looking at it as you're being selfish if you're just focusing on yourself. Now, you have 100 tips in your book. I'll tell you, I have two favorites. I did mark them, but I won't go to the page. One is smile, because I think it's something I work on. I get so serious, and we talked a little bit about that before we got on the video. The other one is to talk like you speak, because I find that if I'm using language that I'm not comfortable with, I tend to trip over myself, and that's not helpful with what we talked about earlier about some of our fears and why we have those fears. So tell me your favorite tip and why it's so important to you.
Well, you might not be surprised that my favorite tip, based on what I said earlier, and it being tip number one in the book, is to focus on giving a gift. That focus on your presentation being a gift for your audience, to take the focus off yourself, put the focus on the audience where it belongs, and actually feel like what you have can help them make a decision. It can possibly change their lives, and be like that mom on Christmas morning where you can't wait to give your child the gift that you've picked, especially for them. You're excited to give it. And I find having that attitude solves a host of problems. I mean, there's a lot of techniques that you can work on, but if you're excited to give a message, you'll probably smile because you can't wait to give that message, for example. And you'll probably talk the way you speak because you are passionate in the moment and you don't have to say it a certain way. Surely you've practiced it, so there are words that come out similarly each time, but by focusing on the audience, focusing on your message being important, you'll naturally solve a host of problems. And frankly, and I have a few clients who are concerned about things like filler words and ums, and I say it can be distracting when they are done in excess. However, if you speak with passion, if you're an interesting person, people will forgive a whole host of small errors as long as you are passionate about what you're talking about and you talk about something that the audience cares about.
Now I'm chuckling to myself inside because I'm like, oh my goodness, I hope I'm not going to start doing that, because I do that as well. And I know particularly when I'm trying to think, it's like a filler pause. So I'm glad that you said that. If you have that passion, hopefully you're going to be able to overcome that. And if you're not, that people are going to give you grace about that. Now, most of your tips do apply to speaking in person or virtually, but you have 10 tips specific to speaking on video. So can you give us a highlight of a couple of those tips for the folks that are watching us today or listening in?
Of course, Regina. I would say the tips revolve around 3 different areas: distractions, technology, and the differences in presenting online versus presenting in person. Distractions is actually huge, where not only can you be distracted, maybe with the cat coming in and walking across your keyboard, or somebody distracting you, or your phone ringing, or a notification popping up, or the lure of Facebook, which you probably wouldn't do if you were presenting. But I do know that if I were to ask the attendees here, how many of you have ever multitasked during a presentation? It would be 100%, because it is so easy to do. But from a speaker's perspective, you have to be aware of potential distractions that could come up and be proactive in reducing them. For example, I put a Post-it note on my door, which I close so the cat can't come in, that says, "Do not disturb," so my husband won't walk in just to tell me some exciting thing. So he knows not to walk in. Then when it comes to, I think technology was what I mentioned. Technology can be very scary because so many things can go wrong with technology. The biggest thing people can do is to practice the platform. We had a technology practice on Monday. We actually took, I think, 45 minutes to go through and practice some different things. And I have experience on Zoom. However, I had never been on the Zoom webinar platform. So that was something new for me. And we practiced doing various things to make sure that this would work. So practicing the platform, and you can practice by yourself. I do know, for example, for Zoom, you could just practice all by yourself. You can even record it, see how you look. But I would suggest, if you're giving a presentation to a group, that maybe you get a few friends and practice your presentation, or at least go through the elements. So if you're going to be using interactive elements such as chat, sharing a slide, showing a video, that You can make mistakes with your friends, so you're less likely to make mistakes when it really counts. And that all ties into the differences in presenting online versus in person. There are a lot of considerations, for example, the lighting, the background, that you don't really think about too much when you're presenting in person. So technology, distractions, and then just some differences in presenting, I think, are considerations.
Great. Diane, I want to give you a quick little plug here and let folks know that we're going to be sending out some resources when we send out the link to this video program. And I just want to mention what some of those are. So Diane has graciously provided us with a link to a virtual presentation checklist so that you don't have to forget anything when you're getting on a presentation, and also top 5 ways to look bad on Zoom, which is a video, and I watched it earlier this morning because I was like, oh my, I hope I'm not making any of the mistakes. And then also we'll be sending out information on how they can actually book a complimentary coaching session on communication with you if they're interested. So I just wanted to make that plug for you, and appreciate you offering that to our viewers and or listeners. So I want to move on to the next question. So we all suddenly are using Zoom as the norm for either presenting or speaking or having meetings. So I have a couple questions around that I would like to ask you. What's the number one thing that people fail to do when they're speaking virtually?
I would say, and I mentioned it before, they fail to practice the platform adequately, because once you practice it, all the other problems will probably come across, such as, is there lighting on your face and not behind you? Then the other thing they forget is that it is not the same. And so today is not the best example of how to do an interactive meeting, because we're not really interacting with the participants. But people forget that you do need to have more interactive elements when you are presenting virtually, in part because people are distracted.
Right. And I think that's a great point. So I want to talk, we talked earlier about, people worrying about what they're going to say and not memorizing things. How can a person use speaker notes or cues while they're speaking virtually?
Well, I am going to show you some examples. I have uploaded virtual backgrounds to Zoom, so I will show you some. So here's one thing that's really easy to do, where you have, so you can see my webcam that's at the top of this picture. Mm-hmm. And I simply have a Word document open and near the webcam. That's very easy. You can even use the scrolling function if you want to keep the words near the top. Then another thing you can do, if you don't need very many notes, is to simply put a little Post-it note right next to the webcam. And then just for fun, I created what I call my webcam buddy, if I have something a little longer, where I just type up notes and I have a slot for my webcam. Now, if you have a laptop with a built-in webcam, you probably only need a very small cutout. But those are some ways that you can deal with notes as you're working on giving virtual presentations.
Yeah. And again, we don't have to be perfect. I think we just need to make sure that we have the tools necessary to convey our message. So, since you just shared some virtual backgrounds, what's your opinion on virtual backgrounds?
Well, I would say it depends. Here's some reasons why you wouldn't want to use virtual backgrounds. Some organizations, some companies do not allow their employees to use virtual backgrounds. I have a friend in the financial industry, and she is not allowed to use virtual backgrounds. So obviously, if you're not allowed to use them, you wouldn't use them. Okay. You also wouldn't want to use a virtual background if you can't execute it well. I'm sure you've been on Zoom calls where people are trying out some of the fun virtual backgrounds, but they like they'll turn their head and part of their head will disappear, or things will come in and out. That happens when you do not actually have a green screen. So I'm going to show you right now what is actually behind me is the green screen, because my computer will not do a virtual background without a green screen. So it also helps that I come across better than if you were to try a virtual background with what you have, I don't even know if it would work. So if you can't execute it well, you wouldn't want to have a virtual background. But some reasons to use a virtual background would be if you want to brand yourself. So here's a branded background that I use when I'm coaching or speaking. You may be speaking on behalf of an organization. So I have a Toastmasters background when I am speaking in my Toastmasters clubs. Or if you're doing something just for fun, I could be the crazy cat lady. So those are you could do some fun things with virtual backgrounds. And you can also do branding. It can look better than what's behind you. If you have a cluttered background, it's an opportunity to hide what's behind you. I have a very boring background. Okay. So those are some reasons.
Point right here. But the funny thing is I did have some things. I'll just show you one of the things because I try to lighten things up. I had this hanging over my closet and I took it down because I thought, distracting. I don't want people to be distracted. So I opted for the plain closet doors as opposed to something fun. That's just for me to keep lighten things up when I'm working in my office and whatnot. So
if you want a tip, if you could have a lighter background behind you because your hair kind of blends in with your closet.
Yeah, so I have to work on that because I've tried a couple different locations. In a lot of places I've tried, the lighting is the problem. And I've looked at some lights like you've talked about. So I think all of those are important. Yes, because I don't want to blend in, right?
You possibly could even have a sheet. My husband, because he does some photography, happened to have this humongous green sheet background that takes up half his office, but he'll use that as a background. I just have a pop-up green screen that I use that I bought in January before I knew all of this was going to happen, thinking I would just put it in my closet when I wasn't using it.
Right.
And since the middle of March, I have not put it away.
Right. Well, and now it's difficult and still is to get equipment because I mentioned prior to starting our call today, one of my headsets went bad and I ordered one and it was on back order. And it's probably a little bit similar, but it's different from what I had. And I didn't want to try it out on this call because it literally arrived at 11 a.m. this morning. So not the best time when you're using Zoom to do an author interview for the first time to try out a new headset. So I want to move us forward just a little bit. I know that you do communications and presentations coaching on Zoom. And so I'm curious, what's the number one communication skill that most people want to work on when they're working with you?
Well, I would have to say, first of all, the most important communication skill is probably listening, where people will listen carefully to what other people are saying. They will ask clarifying questions. They might paraphrase. They'll pay attention to things like body language. But no, that is not what anybody ever really wants to work on. What they want to work on typically involves clarity of their message and clarity in getting it across. So clarity can involve a lot of things. It can involve getting to the point. It can involve reduction in filler words. It can involve knowing what your audience needs and wants so you can be clear in delivering that message. So clarity is probably the number one thing.
Okay, well, that's good to know. So we are winding down on time, Diane, and before we go, I have one final question. You know, in addition to perhaps reading your book and working with you, which I do hope that people will consider doing both, what are some other ways that people can improve their communication skills?
Well, thank you for asking, Regina. Of course, listening better is a good way to improve. And also working on answering questions in a format so that you get to the point and don't have people wondering what your format is. And I'm just going to show you very quickly. I coach people on using the PREP format, where when you're asked a question, state your point first, get it out of the way, then give a reason, perhaps provide an example or evidence, and then restate your point so people are very clear. So being clear is important. And finally, if you want to practice public speaking skills in a supportive, fun, and not very expensive way, I would suggest looking into Toastmaster clubs. Right now, I think almost all Toastmaster clubs are meeting via Zoom, so it's a very convenient way to practice right from your home.
How timely too, right? As we're all trying to Zoom.
Right.
Well, I want to say thank you so much, Diane. That does conclude our interview today. And I just want to do another shout out for Diane, author of 100 Tips and Tricks to Appear Confident in Presentations, Public Speaking Success in 5 minutes or less. And I just want to remind you all that you can learn more about Diane, her books, her program, and how to schedule a complimentary coaching session on communication at virtualspeechcoach.com. And I'll repeat that, virtualspeechcoach.com. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Diane. And you can learn more about our upcoming programs and podcasts and what's going on with Women at the Top at my website, reginabarr.com. So with that, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here today. Have a great day.